A year in review for you. Kerry Donaldson will join me Monday, November 3rd, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The race to the championship. Jacque Villeneuve crowned in heaven.
Vincent. The glory and tragedy of car racing are entwined in the saga of one Quebec father and son. The father, Gilles Villeneuve, rose from small-town obscurity to the pinnacle of Formula One racing by pushing his car and himself to the limit. In 1982, during a Grand Prix race, he was thrown from his red Ferrari and killed. His son, Jacque, was 11 years old. The tragic death of his father did not deter young Jacque. His destiny, too, was to drive. Like his father, he craved the thrill of speed. But the son would drive faster and smarter than the father, winning the championships Gilles Villeneuve could only dream of. And now the superstar son reigns as the fastest driver in the world. For Joanne Villeneuve, who lost her husband to the sport, Jacque's victory must be bittersweet. Tonight, the story of a mother's stoicism and a son's struggle with his father's legacy.
Jacque Villeneuve is a 26-year-old race car driver. He is also the son of the racing legend, Gilles Villeneuve. He grew up on a racetrack and learned from his father's skill and daring, and this has shaped his life. Gilles Villeneuve drove brilliantly, and some said recklessly. He died on a racetrack, leaving behind a wife and two small children, and a shadow from which his son Jacque would emerge, a champion.
He was the fastest racing driver that history has ever known. He went doing something that he loved, but he hasn't left us, because the world will remember what he has given to motor racing.
They are two men who are bound together by blood and speed. They would have two very different lives in Formula One, the most international of all racing series. But they share one humble beginning in small-town Quebec.
I remember being 8 years old and telling my father all the time to go quicker. I just loved speed.
He was a show. He was a showman on his driving. When he spun off in a big way.
He had a style of his own, of somewhat almost abandoned. But everyone loved that because, I mean, Gilles had his heart right out there in front of him. I mean, he drove with his heart.
I can't imagine my father getting old because he needed to be on the edge all the time.
Gilles Villeneuve drove race cars the way he did snowmobiles. It was a style he learned on the fields of rural Quebec. It was the only form of racing he could afford.
Yeah, all of those races I used to go to. It was the way we spent our weekends. So, I guess I was involved in racing for many, many years without ever it wanting to be my favorite pastime. It was just the way things were, and I guess that when you love someone, especially when you're 16, you're madly in love, you'll do anything. So you just get interested in it. You just get into it, you get interested, you know what they're talking about, and it does become part of your life.
Gilles Villeneuve was born into modest surroundings in Richelieu, Quebec on January 18th, 1950. He was at the steering wheel of a car by the time he was 8 years old, sitting on his father's lap. His family later moved to Berthierville, a town of about 4,000. A Catholic church dominated the landscape. His father, Seville, was a piano tuner. His mother, Georgette, raised Gilles and a younger brother, Jacque, in a house on the edge of town. His brother would call Gilles his best friend.
My mom's against the racing, I knew, because she wants to keep us alive. But my dad never said, no, don't do that, because you're going to have to kill yourself. You want to do it, you're good at it, go ahead and do it.
In Joliet, Villeneuve met 16-year-old Joanne Barthes. She studied at a convent school by day and worked as a cashier by night. His first car had cost his father $100, but now his success on snowmobiles gave him a chance to drive a race car.
And in '73, they had mentioned, you've got to see this crazy Frenchman. He's just sideways everywhere. He's got the wheels half off the car. And every time I looked down, this kid was in the frame somewhere.
Gilles Villeneuve and Joanne Bart were married in 1970. Instead of a limousine, Gilles drove them away in a Mustang. They moved into a motorhome parked on an empty lot across the street from his parents' house. And on April 9th, 1971, their son Jacques was born. 2 years later, the birth of daughter Melanie completed their family. Gilles Villeneuve had entered a profession that he loved, but it was a dangerous one.
It's a mixed feeling because there's so much stress and so much, I mean, you're afraid, there's nervousness, there's a lot of very strong emotions going on.
Villeneuve's family traveled with him to his races. His son Jacques played amongst the sights and sounds of racing.
It was everyday life, basically. So no, I don't really remember the first time I went to a track. I remember more, maybe a couple of times when my dad was in Formula One. Then I remember there's a few glimpses of memories, but we spent most of the time in the motorhome, so that's where my memories are. Not the racing side, more, you know, the caravan life.
He would like to spend some time quiet, alone. He appreciated having his whole family, myself and the children, at the racetrack. I think it gave him a sense of stability and a sense of belonging. And I think that was more important than any other kind of routine.
But Gilles Villeneuve was broke. In order to keep racing, he chose to sell the one thing he owned.
He came home and he said, we have to move. Oh, I said, yeah, where are we going? He said, no, we just have to move. I said, what do you mean we have to move? Why do we have to move? So I sold the house. Oh, okay. What are we going to do? He said, no, I sold the house, I bought a car to go racing. So that was basically what he did. He just sold the house to be able to go racing.
The gamble paid off. The next year, he won 8 races. Later that year, a special promotional race was held, and it brought to Quebec 5 drivers from Formula One. James Hunt epitomized F1 drivers, men who came from wealth and cultured European backgrounds. The only thing Villeneuve had in common with them was his talent. Gilles Villeneuve beat them all and earned himself a chance to drive in Formula One.
I remember James Hunt coming back from the Formula Atlantic race in Trois-Rivières in '76, and he'd been blown off by Gilles, as indeed had all the other Europeans who'd gone over for it. And I remember him just raving, this kid has got to be in Formula One, you know, he's the greatest thing I've ever seen, and so on. And I went up to Silverstone actually to watch him test before the Grand Prix, and I have never seen anybody, I don't think that I can think of anybody who's ever driven a Formula One car first time out like that.
But in the complex business world of Formula One, talent was not always enough. Another driver was hired to replace him.
Very angry, very annoyed, disappointed, where after all those years of trying hard, of giving up a lot, financially, family-wise, everything, you end up seeing the rainbow, and you know the pot of gold is at the end of the rainbow, and you start walking to it, and you just never get there, and that's how it basically felt. I mean, just a big disappointment.
Gilles Villeneuve returned to Quebec, fearing that his Formula One dream had ended before it had even begun. But across the ocean in Europe, his daring style had been noticed, and one of those who had noticed it was the most famous man in the history of motor racing.
Conoscevo I suoi precedenti sulle motoslip. Mi avevano parlato del suo coraggio e quando mi si è presentato questo piccolo canadese, questo minuscolo fascio di nervi che io ho paragonato nella sua struttura fisica al grande nuvolare, ho detto tentiamo.
In only 4 short years, Gilles Villeneuve's talent and love of speed had carried him to the wealth and glamour of Formula One. He had overcome hardship and despair and the obscurity of small-town Quebec by always pushing his car to the limit, and sometimes over it. He would now race in countries where racing news was front-page news and where drivers were treated like kings. The attention did not change him.
I had a letter of intent with Joe. When we got serious about it, I had my secretary made a letter that eventually we would sign a contract. We never did. After a while, I got to know Gilles, and I figured I don't need a contract with him. He had my word, I had his word, and we went that way.
Gilles Villeneuve was 27 years old when he moved his family to Monaco to begin their new lives. He had been outside of Canada only once before and was still struggling with English. His son Jacques would always call himself Canadian, but Europe would be his home. He would visit all the racetracks of Formula One long before he ever had a chance to race on them.
It's a big step. I was 8 or 9 or 7, I can't remember precisely, when we moved to Europe. And yeah, it was a big culture shock. But at that age, you can adapt to anything, so it doesn't really matter. But it was funny that speaking the same language, it was difficult to understand each other at the beginning. When you're not used to the different accent and you've you've been all your life in the countryside, it is a little bit different. But my sister and myself, it was pretty easy to adapt. I guess it was a little bit more difficult for my father.
It was very difficult for him. And for the entire family. It was the laugh of the club of friends that we had, because he fed on pizza, hamburgers, tarte au sucre, sugar pies, and very bad Coca-Cola, very bad diet, and he didn't want to know anything about the French cuisine. He was holding back from all that, and he didn't really want to forget his roots or his culture or his way of life. He was very generous, very open, very sincere, very straightforward. Seems to always be happy, always trying to do silly things, crazy things, always wanted to have fun, living 100%. 200 miles an hour, with the kids in the car in the back, and the kids, Jacques, saying, quicker, daddy, quicker.
Villeneuve's all-out approach had gotten him to Formula One, but it caused him problems in his first year there. It was a year marked by crashes and controversy.
And Villeneuve's lost it! Incredible! Villeneuve, 360
Both volatile Italian race fans and seasoned race observers began questioning Enzo Ferrari's choice of drivers.
Gilles came on the scene, like a hurricane. That I remember in Japan, he had a big shunt right in the first race. But then again, many of us do that. He came on strong.
I mean, I think when you went in there was nothing else that was important. And I mean, without being dramatic, because I was very safety conscious, I mean, you felt that you were prepared to die for what you were doing. You were young and stupid, but...
For the second time in his life, Villeneuve saw his career crumbling before his eyes. The fear was very real, but it was not like a race driver to air this publicly.
Of course, it's frustrating to not be more competitive than that now, but nothing we can do except work hard and test more, and eventually it will come.
Then came the 1978 Canadian Grand Prix. Gilles Villeneuve returned to Quebec and to a racetrack less than an hour's drive from his childhood home. 70,000 fans huddled against the cold of early October to watch their local hero try to salvage his career. Villeneuve had qualified third on the grid, just behind future teammate Jody Scheckter. After a difficult start, he drove well, capturing and maintaining a second-place position at the halfway point of the race. By lap 50, he had taken over the lead.
And the man right now is Gilles Villeneuve. Even from commentary position and decide, you two up here, I can hear the crowd cheering. What a day for your country. You've got your Prime Minister here, and it could be a great celebration.
It was Gilles Villeneuve's first Formula One win, and the first ever by a Canadian. The win meant that he could continue racing. He celebrated with his family and with his country. He called it the happiest day of his life. Gilles Villeneuve carried the momentum from his emotional win in Canada into 1979. He won often, and often won spectacularly, and challenged his more experienced teammate, Jody Scheckter, in the race for the World Driving Championship. Drivers talk about a zone where speed and control mesh so perfectly that they'll risk driving on the edge that separates greatness from disaster. Gilles Villeneuve lived on that edge. In Dijon, he drove like no one had ever driven before.
And here, John, to the inside goes Arnoux, and he's going to make a move. And that little Villeneuve held him off again. His front plate's locked up, and they're going round side by side. Have touched again. They touch again. Arnoux gets rid of it. He goes way low into the bottom of the course. Arnoux runs over the concrete. Villeneuve comes back on the inside. They touch wheels another time. They're bouncing off each other in the final lap of this game. Villeneuve must have been the suspension. They've bounced off each other about 3 times, and I've never seen a display like this. Villeneuve goes back up, Arnoux beside him. You'd think they had stock cars out there, the way they're leaning on each other, David. This is unbelievable in open-wheel racing to knock each other about like that.
Crazy. I mean, crazy. And at the drivers' meetings and privately, I told you, you know, it's stupid what you do there, because you don't get away with it all the time. You know, yeah, he loved it because it caused a sensation. It's wild, everything like this. And I remember in Paris at the meeting saying, that's stupid, we can't do it. But the sponsors loved it, you know. But you don't get away in single-seaters. You don't get away touching wheels all the time. You very seldom get away with it.
If a driver can't produce more than 100% of what everybody thinks is possible, he can never be called a true superstar. And for sure, Gilles was a superstar. He produced 110%, in my opinion, all the time, whether he was testing, racing, or what.
The young man from Quebec had become a superstar. His son, Jacques, had to adjust to the change.
At the time, Gilles was very active in his racing career, so the relationship was one of a father very busy and a young kid admiring his dad at different races, a very silent kid that was looking at everything, probably doing part of his informal education, you know, sinking in a lot of elements that are probably today affecting his behavior.
Gilles was not around that much. I mean, Gilles was gone 4 or 5 days out of 7 every week. I mean, Jacques had to grow up with a star image, where his friends at school thought, hey, wow, your father's a race driver, wow. To Jacques, it wasn't wow, it was, that's what my father does.
Gilles Villeneuve and teammate Jody Scheckter came to race in Monza battling for the World Driving Championship. But Scheckter was the more experienced driver. In the language of Formula One, he was the #1 driver. Team Ferrari's code of honor was that if Scheckter was in front, Villeneuve was not to try to pass him. This was a difficult request, but Scheckter was a friend as well as a teammate, and Villeneuve agreed.
And Gilles just sat behind Jody for, I don't know, 45, 50 laps, knowing very well he could pass him, and he never did. And if he'd passed him, he would have won the World Championship. But he'd given his word.
In 1981, Didier Pironi joined Villeneuve at Ferrari, with Villeneuve now the #1 driver. For over 2 years, the Ferrari cars had been uncompetitive, but in 1982, they'd been improved, and Villeneuve began to think that he would finally win the championship he'd forfeited 3 years earlier. But then came a race in Imola. Villeneuve was in the lead. His teammate was right behind him, but Didier Pironi did not honor the code.
Didier Pironi, amazing, has gone in front, despite the fact that they're both in the same team.
And it took Gilles Villeneuve completely by surprise.
Pironi on the grass that time. Now Villeneuve has a look, but there's nowhere to go.
A man of honor had been betrayed.
Villeneuve has lost the race. Didier Pironi has won it.
I was on the podium in Imola. I presented him with the champagne along with the winner, and he was so angry. He was so upset. He was really furious. And I left the track with him. I flew with him on his helicopter with his wife, and really he was in a deep mood of annoyance.
Well, but I called him on the Tuesday morning, I remember. And we spoke for, I don't know, at least an hour. And it frightened me, that conversation frightened me, because he was still as angry as if it had happened sort of 10 minutes ago. And he just said, I said, well, you know, have you talked to Peroni about this? So, you know, and he said, no, I haven't. I'm not going to speak to him again, ever.
Villeneuve's words were prophetic. On an early day in May, he would race for the last time.
Since he was a man of strong belief, of honesty, and on open human rapport, he believed in Didier, and I think after the 82 Imola race, it felt that he had been probably betrayed.
Gilles Villeneuve came to Belgium with his mind in turmoil. He was alone, his family far away in Monaco. His daughter Melanie was to have her first communion the next day. As always, he was attempting to clock the fastest possible lap. It was a style that had endeared him to millions of race fans around the world. He had become known as the fastest driver in the history of Formula One. Gilles Villeneuve started his final qualifying lap. He would approach a challenging left-hand corner at over 150 miles an hour. He would suddenly come upon a slower-moving car. Villeneuve would move quickly to his right, but it was too late. They touched wheels. Gilles Villeneuve died on May 8th, 1982. He was 32 years old.
The checkered flag, which Villeneuve had won so many times throughout his career, draped his coffin as it traveled down the aisle of his boyhood church. A brief eulogy was delivered by Villeneuve's closest friend, former Ferrari teammate Jody Scheckter.
Gilles was the most genuine person I ever knew.
And on the lawn outside, thousands more local residents who had waited patiently crowded to pay their last respects to the young man whose exploits around the world had made them all exceedingly proud.
Jacques Villeneuve was 12 years old when his father died. He would choose to keep his memories of him private. After her husband's funeral, Joanne returned to Monaco with the children and began the difficult task of rebuilding their lives. She enrolled them in a Swiss boarding school, hoping to distance them from painful memories.
But you know, when you're 12, I was 12 when my father died. It's different than if I had been 16 or 17, because that's probably where you need your father most, I guess. And if you've been used to growing up without him, then it's easier to adapt.
We're all going through our own emotional issues without talking about it and without telling each other. My mom went through a very, very difficult time, and she had to adjust to a completely different life. And so did we. When we were sent to Switzerland, it was actually a good thing for Jacques. He needed the space, he needed the air, he needed to be able to spend himself physically, which in Monaco he couldn't.
It was very difficult at the time. It hurt a lot. And I think going to the boarding school probably helped us a lot to put it behind, or not to forget it, but just to swallow it and to accept it as part of normal life. Because that's the thing, is that normal life changes from that moment on, and there's no point in spending the next 10 years of your life just thinking about that and you know, go feeling all sad and worried, and there's no point, because nothing can be changed. So it's better to accept it and to go forward. And as soon as I got there, then I started to be, not that I was studying more, but more serious, and I could use my mind a little bit better somehow. Maybe there was something blocking me at home, I don't know, but it's like a small society inside the normal society, and you have to build your own life around it. You have to build your life around the rules that are there. And like in any society, you'll have the few people that will lead, and then everybody else that will just follow. But then you have the few people that survey you, which is like the police in a way. And you have to find your way and to try to use the rules as best as you can. So I think it's a great preparation for life.
And Jacques Villeneuve's life would be that of a race car driver.
There was no question. That was what he was going to do, and he never mentioned anything else. And it's not that he ever came out and said, oh, you know, I'm going to do that, or, you know, I'm going to be... No, it was just this... It was decided a long time ago, and there was never any looking back.
As far as I can remember, I always wanted to race cars anyway. So the choice has always been there, but I didn't give myself the choice just because, it was something very, very deep that I really wanted to do.
Jacques Villeneuve had lost a father on the racetrack. In his career, he would reconcile this by developing a driving style all of his own. Joanne Villeneuve had lost a husband and had a difficult decision to make.
And so I did speak to Patrick Tombe, who's been a family friend for many, many years. And his advice was, he's going to do it anyways. And you should be with him, next to him, or behind him, at least in the beginning, so he makes less mistakes, and maybe people will be a little more careful with him.
For the next 2 summers, Jacques Villeneuve returned to his native Quebec, where he attended the same driving school where his father had trained many years earlier. He also attended a school run by an old teammate of his father's.
But honestly, I didn't think he was very focused at that point, and I didn't expect that he would finally switch on and make a career out of it, and such a successful career. But in return, he did show a lot of talent, but not on a consistent base. You could see that naturally he was talented, but he was not utilizing it properly because of a lack of focus.
But whatever his limitations, Villeneuve was once again on a racetrack. At 17, Jacques Villeneuve left school and went to Italy, where race sponsors were willing to bank on his name. But Italy was also the country where his name rekindled passionate memories of a legendary father.
He got in with a huge baggage and no experience, and that's all he got from the press. Constant comparison, and people immediately put expectations on him, and he had no experience. So the first couple years in Formula 3 were, he didn't give out results. He had, he was, every step of the way was a fight. And to be constantly compared like this was very, very difficult for him mentally and emotionally.
And people have thought that I hated my father, for example, that people thought that I was trying to erase him, and a lot of people called my mother asking what my problem was. And that, that's completely wrong. If people can't understand that I have my own emotions and my own ideas and I keep them to myself, I don't, it's most of the time it's people that didn't even know my father, so I don't see why it concerns them.
But that is the story in racing. I mean, it isn't an easy thing. The name should and could help, but you have to be willing to give up all the necessary things in order to enjoy the last name.
But 3 difficult years had sharpened Jacques Villeneuve's focus, and he made the kind of intelligent decision that came to mark his career. He moved away to race in Japan, giving himself a break from the intense attention.
Japan was a great opportunity to get away, and to be alone in a way, because I got out of the cocoon, the family cocoon. I was by myself in a flat in Tokyo, and I evolved a lot as a driver because we were testing a lot. Also as a person, I was left more to my own devices, and I had to take life more seriously.
He really made his way through that and managed to handle the situation of being Gilles' son, to be Jacques Villeneuve, and suddenly now to really be now his own man by his own right.
in anything that happens to you in life, there's always a good side that you can take out of it, and it's important for you to not just sit down and feel sorry for yourself, and to just look forward and to see what what you can achieve, and in a way it made me stronger, and it helps me to drive today. And
Japan gave Villeneuve the opportunity to integrate the experiences of his early life, and he emerged with a clearer idea of what his own path and driving style would be. He moved back to North America and Formula Atlantic, the stepping stone to the famous IndyCar series, one that his father had never competed in. Race experts were impressed, and the next year, the 23-year-old Villeneuve would enter the IndyCar circuit. He had reached the pinnacle of North American racing. When his father had been his age, he had not yet even been in a race car. And where his father had gained much needed attention with his spectacular driving style, Jacques Villeneuve's more methodical approach had been in the spotlight from the very beginning, and the attention would continue to be magnified. Villeneuve's arrival in IndyCar brought him millions of new race fans, and what interested race experts was Villeneuve's unique driving style, one that combined his father's pure speed with a more calculated approach to racing.
Well, he has just huge amounts of natural talent and natural ability, and that's coupled with his tremendous intelligence and his ability to make the right decisions at the right time. All of those things are things that really can't be taught.
I think Jacques is much more calculated than Gilles was, but the circumstances are different. I think Gilles was probably playing with more of inferior equipment, and he had to get it up more, whereas Jacques, I think, has been more fortunate to be with better equipment, more of a level playing field, and he can just express his talents without just really pressing the envelope as much.
Jacques' more a thinking driver. He takes a chance when it's right. He waits till everything's right and goes for it, has more patience, than his father, I think.
But no race driver can succeed without being fast. For Villeneuve, it's almost second nature.
Yeah, you get used to the speed. You get used to the speed, and it doesn't feel fast anymore. You'll be driving at 200 miles an hour on an oval, or over 200 miles an hour, and it will feel natural, and you get so focused in the race that your world becomes very small. It becomes your team, the pits, and the tarmac of the racetrack, and your car, and that's it. Nothing else exists. So 100% of your concentration of your being is onto that. There's a lot of drivers that can drive a car quick, that will feel the car, but I think what makes the difference in the end is if you can use your head at the same time. If you can be on the edge, have the adrenaline, and still be able to think straight. And I think that's what makes the difference.
But no amount of concentration can eliminate the inherent danger of high-speed racing.
Wide in the wall, no!
Hopefully he is okay.
Fear doesn't come into play. The moment you get fear, then you cannot drive properly. You have no more freedom. You're stuck, and you don't think straight. Your body doesn't react in the right way. Your body doesn't feel what the car is doing, and that's where you'll start making mistakes, and that's when you'll get hurt, probably.
Every race driver has had accidents. How they react to them can make the difference in a career.
You get out of there and you're a little bit shaken, just because there was a lot of G-forces you took and all that, but any crash you go through, you always want to not be hurt, basically. You want to show that you're not hurt and get out of your car and be as if nothing had happened. And I don't know if that's for everyone, but for me anyway, it's a way of keeping your cool, and you don't want it to overwhelm you. You don't want it to have any reaction on you, at least for a short while. You want to show everybody that, oh, that was nothing. And maybe it's a way of feeling strong. I don't know. But crashes are never good.
Villeneuve's first season in Indy was a success. He won his first race and the Rookie of the Year award. In his second year, Villeneuve did even better, winning 4 races and the IndyCar Drivers' Championship. He also won the Lou Marsh Trophy as Canada's Athlete of the Year, giving auto racing in Canada the kind of profile that only his father had ever given it before. And for the first time, it was becoming clear that Jacques Villeneuve had the potential to be a truly great race car driver. He made history by winning the famous Indianapolis 500 and did it in a spectacular fashion.
The magnitude of his achievement. Listen to the roar of the crowd. Back from 2 laps down.
The first Canadian on his way to winning the Indianapolis 500. Jacques Villeneuve on the home stretch. And the 79th Indy 500 has been won by Jacques Villeneuve. The young Canadian has taken the win. Their second place.
The win would have a profound effect on Villeneuve's future.
Customary congratulations of everybody.
Formula One's Team Williams came calling.
After the win in Indianapolis, that's when Williams got interested. The other ones, you know, they were a little bit afraid of taking the risk. They didn't put much value, or they didn't put any value on racing in the States and on Indianapolis. So they weren't really ready to take the risk. You know, it would be like a test driving for Ferrari or stuff like that.
Jacques Villeneuve didn't go with Ferrari, his father's old team. It was the smart choice. Williams had the best car in Formula One. If his choice showed a lack of sentimentality, it also showed the instincts of a champion.
I believe that you're a master of your own life anyway, so you can always adapt it a little bit. I mean, what would be the point in pushing yourself if everything was 100% already drawn for you? Then there's no point in trying to achieve anything. So for me, it's important to believe that, you know, you can make your own life. Else I wouldn't be out there, you know, fighting and going for it.
He really, really wants something. He can put his whole mind to it, and yeah, he'll get there. He'll get it.
It's part of, I mean, part of destiny, where you have a road to follow. And you follow that road, and what has to happen will happen. You can change some of the things. You can change how things happen, but basically, what really has to happen, or what is meant to happen, will eventually happen. Or, I mean, I think I've come to think of it that way. I think it's made my coping with everything easier.
Joanne Villeneuve has decided not to attend any of her son's races. In 1996, Jacques Villeneuve entered Formula One. He knew that questions about his father would soon follow. But now at 25, he had learned to make the best of the inevitable comparisons.
It's been part of my racing career ever since I started. It was there in the States as well. And as the races went on, you know, it was less and less a concern of the public or even of the media. So I would suspect the same thing would end up happening here. But usually, when there's pressure, you perform better if you don't crack.
But there were other pressures as well, and he would have to deal with them if his career was to stay on track.
I have a hard time with fans. You know, when there's if it's a few people by themselves, then it can be very good if they're respectful. Then it can feel very nice. It's just when it's a mob. I just feel like escaping, because I run out of air, and I'm not very at ease with that. It's something maybe I should change. I don't know, but you know, that it's so important to cut off for a little bit to really recharge your batteries. So if you know, it's important to have hobbies, or to have things that you'll do in 2 days that will have nothing to do with racing. I spend a lot of time, well, skiing in winter, because I use it as part of my training. I have to do something that will be more fulfilling. It could be jogging on the seaside, so you can see things. I would say, well, computers. But started with video games, you know, when I was younger, but then it evolved into anything on the computer. I have other interests, and I don't want, you know, to die of old age knowing I've only been a race car driver, and there's so many things in life, you know, there's so many things to discover still, and the world is evolving at a pretty high speed now.
Jacques Villeneuve drives in an era very different from his father's. Computer technicians are now just as important as mechanics, and the politics of sponsors and team owners are more complex. But when Jacques Villeneuve is on a racetrack, those differences disappear. He travels at more than 150 miles an hour. His heart beats about 200 beats per minute. He loses almost 6 pounds of body weight during a race and endures forces up to 4 times those of gravity. Gilles Villeneuve experienced exactly the same things. Perhaps in some ways, no one can understand him better than his own son. But in his first year, all of Villeneuve's focus was on the challenging transition to Formula One. Only Mario Andretti had ever successfully made the step from Indy cars to F1. His son Michael had tried to make the transition and failed. But that was not in Villeneuve's plans.
Jacque, and all the people around Jacque, he has good people around him. They quizzed us like crazy, you know, on what we did wrong, and they just didn't want to make the same mistakes as we did, and they didn't.
The problem is, of course, if you drive for Williams, you are required to win. It's not expected, it's assumed.
Jacques Villeneuve would meet and surpass everyone's expectations. In 1996, Jacques Villeneuve won his first Formula One race, and soon afterwards, his second. He would go on to win twice more, tying a decades-old rookie record. He would finish a remarkable second in the World Championship to Damon Hill, a much older teammate who had dealt with his own legendary father's shadow many years earlier. But more was yet to come. The next year, Jacques Villeneuve would win often. In pursuit of the World Championship, his father had been denied. Gilles Villeneuve was a great driver who died young and before he could win a championship. His son Jacques has taken a different path, one that has been shaped by the privileges and scrutiny of his father's legacy.
I used to think everybody was self-made. I thought desire brought success, and it does. But inheritance has something to do with it, not all of it. Because if a driver doesn't want to get up and go, if he doesn't know how to step ahead of the other, if he doesn't know how to look a little higher, he's not going to make it anyway.
Jacque also has an incredible amount of natural talent, which clearly he's inherited from his father. He, in fact, has better mind management, and I think that will serve him well, and I think he'll win many more races because of it. And I think he will go down in history as being a driver who will have won more.
As Jacques Villeneuve continued his pursuit of the World Championship, a stamp unveiling took place in Montreal. It was a final homage to the legend of Gilles Villeneuve.
You know, I've never tried to walk into a shadow or to try and beat him. I've never competed against him, and I've always been proud of what he's achieved and of being his son. And anything anything I would do, it doesn't matter how many championships I could win, he would still be, you know, a hero and a legend, and he would still be up there.
In accepting the challenges of his father's legend, Jacques Villeneuve has made the most of the opportunity his father's life had given him. On October 26, 1997, Jacques Villeneuve won the World Driving Championship.